Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the K-12 Higher Ed CIP Subcommittee this morning. With that, I think we've got enough folks to start, and we'll have other people joining us. It's that time of season where folks are everywhere. So if I could go ahead and have the staff call the roll this morning, please.
Senator Canizaro. Senator Dondero-Luke. Senator Keycapper. Here. Senator Ratty. Here. Senator Severs-Gansert. Assemblywoman Benitez-Thompson.
Here.
Assemblyman Frierson.
Yes,
Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Here.
Assemblyman Hafen. Here. Assemblywoman Howdigi. Assemblyman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblyman Roberts.
Here.
Chair Carlton.
And I am here. Please mark the other members present when they arrive. I know they're here in the building somewhere, and I don't think we need to send the sergeant at arms out to find them yet, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it later this session. So with that committee, this morning we have closing on NSHE system-wide. We have Mr. Casera here to walk us through this document. Please ask questions if you need to as we move through this. And Mr. Casera, let's go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Kucera with LCB Fiscal for the record. Beginning on page 3 of your closing packet, this morning we'll be closing the NSHE budget system-wide. The Nevada System of Higher Education, or NSHE, is governed by an elected 13-member board of regents, and the governor recommends $1.28 billion in general fund appropriations to support NSHE's operating budgets for the 21 to 23 biennium. Moving to page 4 of your closing packet, the table lists all the general fund appropriations as recommended compared to the 2021 original legislatively approved amounts. And this table also includes a listing of the 8 major closing items. Beginning with major closing item number 1, our budget reduction measures. The figures in the prior table are inclusive of governor recommended general fund budget reductions of $84.5 million in each year of the 21 to 23 biennium. General categories of budget reductions include a hiring freeze, which represents approximately $47.4 million per year, reduced travel of $1.9 million each year of the biennium, operating expenditure reductions of approximately $32.3 million per year, a reduction to the Silver State Opportunity Grant of $600,000 per year, and revenue and expenditure offsets between non-state and state-supported budgets of approximately $2.2 million per year. The listing of the formula-funded institutions on page 5, beginning with UNLV, lists a general summary of the reductions for the major institutions. Fiscal staff will note 2 issues here. The first is that UNLV and DRI utilized revenues representing investment income approved by the distribution of the Board of Regents to offset some of their general fund reductions. Secondly, UNR did include the elimination of some filled positions based on, according to testimony by representatives from the institution, based on their ability to hire and their relative vacancy savings compared to other institutions. Additionally, Governor recommended general fund deductions for the non-formula budgets and professional schools, excluding the Desert Research Institute, total $21.2 million in each year of the 21 to 23 biennium. The tables on page 6 and page 7 of your closing packet detail the governor recommended budget reductions. The table on page 6 compares the annual budget reductions for each NC institution compared to the fiscal year 21 original legislatively approved amounts, and note the total $84.5 million in reductions in each fiscal year of the biennium represents approximately 12.2% decrease relative to that fiscal year 21 original legislatively approved amount. The table on page 7 compares the total reductions this biennium with a before the reductions and the amount after, noting that $1.28 billion in total governor recommended general funds. Moving on to page 7 and page 8 of your closing packet, through pandemic-related government funding, federal government funding, there have been appropriations of Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, or HERF, directly to institutions of the Nevada System of Higher Education. The table at the top of page 8 notes the second round of HERF funding through the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. And this includes $112 million, $82 million of which is slated for institutional support, and approximately $30 million of which is slated for institutional aid. According to responses provided by the Nevada System of Higher Education, these funds are largely available in calendar year 21. It will be received directly by the institutions and should be expended within 1 year of receipt of those funds. These federal pandemic-related dollars are not included in any of the general fund reduction tables mentioned earlier. According to information provided by the system, follow-up information following the hearing, a third round of American Rescue Plan HERF funding is expected to be made available directly to institutions, the estimated breakdown of which is provided at the table at the bottom of page 8. According to national organizations, the distributions of funds will be similar to the first round of funding through the CARES Act, meaning that funding between institutional support and student aid is approximately a 50-50 split. However, the allowable uses of both the institutional portion and the student aid are expected to be similar to the second round of funding through the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. Fiscal staff note federal guidance has not yet been received relating to timing or the exact allowable uses. However, national organizations and NSHE have estimated the distribution, again at that table at the bottom of page 8. The decision for the subcommittee in the motion at the bottom of page 8 asks if the subcommittee wishes to recommend $84.5 million in general fund budget reductions across all NSHE state-supported budgets each year of the 21 to 23 biennium, as recommended by the governor.
A lot of information there, but a lot of it very, very similar to the conversations that we had in presentation and working through these budgets. So, committee members, are there any questions or clarifications on any of the items that we just went through? Not seeing any at this time. Ms. Hodeggy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move for approval of $84.5 million in general fund budget reductions across all NSHE state-supported budgets each year of the 21-23 biennium as recommended by the governor.
Second. And I have a motion from Ms. Hodeggy, a second from Senator Don Darrell Loop. Questions or comments on the motion? Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. I know we're closing right now, and we have a substantial cut to higher education, but given the economic forum, I would imagine the intent is to come back and to look at these numbers because we have significantly more money than we thought we were going to have, and I understand that we may need to close everything and then go back with amendments or maybe an omnibus bill to add funds back.
And I knew this was going to come up today, so had numerous conversations with folks. There is a lot of moving pieces. There's lawsuits, there's divots in places all over the budget that need to be dealt with. I think there needs to be a global conversation moving forward. We've got technically 26 days left, but I'm aiming for like 24, 25, just because I need to have a goal. So we will have those conversations in the future. Can't promise anything on anything, but knowing where we are, we need to just get through closing all these and then have those conversations in the future.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I realize we do need to close budgets, but we also need to recognize the substantial funds that came in, and that we need to potentially revise. So thank you. I appreciate the comments.
And, knowing what those numbers are right now, they need to be run through the fund balance, and we need to look at all the stickies that we've put on all the cuts everywhere over the last, 40 to 50 days, and then have that conversation and set our priorities. So, okay. Any other questions or comments at this time? So I imagine with the news that we had yesterday, this closing is going to go a lot smoother because some of the thoughts and processes I had, I've set off to the side. So, and you dodged a bullet from me this time. So just want you to put that on the plus side on my column for this 1 year, okay? So with that, not seeing any other questions or comments at this time, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any in opposition? Hearing no opposition, passes unanimously of the members present. Going on to item number 2, Mr. Casera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The second major issue with the Nevada System of Higher Education budgets is higher education funding distribution formula and performance funding pool for instructional budgets. This is broken out into several sections, each representing a component of the funding formula that will be discussed in detail. The first section, A, is weighted student credit hours. As originally recommended by the governor for fiscal year 22 and 23, the governor recommended calculated general fund value of a weighted student credit hour is $167.81 compared to the legislatively approved weighted student credit hour value of $164.04 in 20 and $164.61 in fiscal year 21. Available general fund appropriations are determined through the generic base maintenance and enhancement funding methodology, less any pre-formula allocations. The executive budget fiscal staff notes utilizes the same credit hour weighting taxonomy for fiscal year 20 as approved by the 2019 legislature. However, there have been some updates to this as discussed at the bottom of page 9. The funding formula as originally submitted by the governor did not include amounts recommended for statewide inflation, which is decision unit M100, and statewide fringe benefit rate adjustment, which is M300, both of which are traditional components in the base maintenance and enhancement calculation. The original funding formula also included a technical error relating to the research operations and maintenance carve-out for UNLV. These adjustments, as made and recommended by fiscal staff, include no impact on the budget. However, as these components are integral to the calculation of the weighted student credit hour, there has been an impact on the resulting output for fiscal years 22 and 23. As noted at the bottom of page 9, the resulting weighted student credit hour value for fiscal year 22 is calculated at 166.24 and fiscal year 23 at 166.90 after accounting for these adjustments. Moving on to page 10, which is the weighted student credit hour caseload adjustment, which is the decision unit M203 across the formula institutional budgets. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of $24 million in each year of the 21 to 23 biennium, based on an average 4.9% system-wide increase in the fiscal year 20 weighted student credit hours compared to fiscal year 2018. The table in the middle of page 10 details how this caseload calculation is done at the institution level from UNLV to Nevada State College, and again represents a 4.9% growth. Noting the sums at the bottom of the table, 145,918 incremental weighted student credit hours were generated between 18 and 20. That number multiplied by the 164.61, which is the fiscal year 21 weighted student credit hour value, and some math gets us to $24.0 million each year of the biennium. While a dollar amount is calculated from this change in weighted student credit hours for each institution, fiscal staff notes that the amount from all institutions is included in the available pool of available general fund appropriations that is then distributed to all of the institutions through the funding formula based on each institution's proportionate share of weighted student credit hours. And this is an important distinction, and fiscal staff would draw your attention to the table at the top of page 11 that details the difference between the weighted student credit hour calculation as generated by each institution and as received through the funding formula. As shown in this table, there are institutions that receive additional funding that experience growth greater than the average across all institutions. For example, on this table, that would be CSN, GBC, and Nevada State College. For those institutions that experience growth greater than the system-wide average, you'll see a negative amount in that difference between caseload and distribution column. The other institutions, UNLV, UNR, TMCC, and Western Nevada, received growth that was less than the average, and so you'll see a positive difference in that column. However, fiscal staff will note that this is just one component of the funding formula, and total amounts received by each institution is again based on each institution's proportionate share of weighted student credit hours, as has been previously approved by prior legislatures. The hearing discussion and post-update information includes budget amendments submitted by the Governor's Finance Office. There are several of which, but the first component that relates to weighted student credit hour caseload growth is Budget Amendment A21-520-3005 that makes a small technical correction to Nevada State College's caseload growth, correcting it to $5,093,774 in each year of the biennium, as represented in your table and supported by the funding formula. This is a small adjustment of $619 and $780 in fiscal years 22 and 23, respectively. During the February 24th, 2021 hearing, members of the subcommittee requested some clarifying details about the calculation of the weighted student credit hour caseload adjustment, and the breakdown at the bottom of page 11 simply reiterates the information provided in the prior table that notes weighted student credit hour caseload adjustments are based on the difference between the current base year, which is fiscal year 20, and the prior base year, which is fiscal year 18. Multiplies that difference by the fiscal year 21 weighted student credit hour value to achieve a $24 million caseload growth. Moving to additional updates at the top of page 12 of your closing document. Members of the subcommittee also requested information related to the projected fiscal year 21 weighted student credit hour totals based on information provided by the system that enrollments were projected to decrease in fiscal year 21. The system did provide a response, however, based on the partial completion of the spring semester. All relevant factors, including withdrawals, failing grades for non-attendance, and end-of-term blank grades, were not included. As a result, a reliable fiscal year 21 weighted student credit hour estimate is not available, and fiscal staff recommend the utilization of fiscal year 2020 weighted student credit hour actuals in accordance with the previously established budget policy and as recommended by the governor. According to the system, enrollment projections average 82,921 in fiscal year 22 and 84,580 in 23, both years projecting growth compared to fiscal years 20 and 21. So while the system is projecting a decrease in fiscal year 21, it is expected that projected enrollments will rebound in 22 and 23. The motion at the top of page 12 asks, does the subcommittee wish to recommend funding weighted student credit hour caseload adjustments with general fund appropriations of $24 million in each fiscal year of the 21 to 23 biennium, based on the fiscal year 2021 calculated weighted student credit hour value of $164.61, including caseload adjustments totaling $1,399 in general fund appropriations included in budget amendment A21-520-3005.
All righty, so, weighted student credit hours. I remember my first couple conversations about this. It took a while to wrap my brain around it. So, committee members, I want you to ask questions if you need to make sure that you really have it, because it's a bit of an interesting way to do things. I'll just put it that way. I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Okay, we're all good? So with that, I believe we can move forward. Ms. Hudigi?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move the committee recommend funding weighted student credit hour caseload adjustments with general fund appropriations of $24 million in each fiscal year of the 21-23 biennium, based on the fiscal year 21 calculated weighted student credit hour value of $164.61, including caseload adjustments totaling $1,399 in general fund appropriations included in budget amendment A215203-005.
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Hudigi, a second from Senator Dondera Loop. Questions or comments on the motion? Not seeing any. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those in opposition? Hearing no opposition, passes unanimously of the members present. Moving on to small institution funding, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Kucera, LCB Fiscal for the record. Moving on to Section C of Major, our closing item 2 within the Nevada System of Higher Education is small institution funding. The governor recommends Great Basin College and Western Nevada College collectively receive general fund appropriations totaling $756,405 in each year of the biennium. The intent of small institution funding is to recognize that all institutions have certain fixed administrative costs regardless of size. The level of recommended funding for GBC and WNC is determined by the actual number of weighted student credit hours greater than 50,000, but less than $100,000, with a maximum amount for each institution of $1.5 million per year. As the institutions grow closer to this 100,000 credit hour mark, the level of institutional funding for the small institution factor decreases. According to the table at the bottom of page 12, this funding represents $756,000 and does show as a 32.5% reduction This is representative of increases in weighted student credit hours for Great Basin and Western Nevada. So while it shows as a negative, there are still dollars appropriated for the small institution factor as recommended by the governor. The M201 decision unit, again, is reflective of the net difference of these figures. However, the institutions will receive additional weighted student credit hour growth through the funding formula for these incremental weighted student credit hours. The decision for the subcommittee at the bottom of page 12 asks if the subcommittee wishes to recommend Great Basin College and Western Nevada College receive general fund appropriations totaling $756,405 collectively in each fiscal year of the 21 to 23 biennium for small institution funding appropriated prior to the calculation of the weighted student credit hour value as a pre-formula allocation.
So with that, committee members, are there any questions or comments at this time? I think closing NSHE after the Cinco de Mayo party is an excellent idea for next legislative session. Someone might need to write this down. Okay, so with that, Ms. Howdigy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move the committee recommend Great Basin College and Western Nevada College receive general fund appropriations totaling $756,405 collectively in each fiscal year of the 21-23 biennium for small institution funding to be appropriated prior to the calculation of the weighted student credit hour value as a pre-formula allocation.
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Howdigy, a second from Senator Don Darrow Loop. Any questions or comments on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any in opposition? Hearing no opposition, passes unanimously of all members present. Moving on. Oh, my favorite, research, space operations, and maintenance. Here we go.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. Section D, starting at the top of page 13 of your closing packet, is research space operation and maintenance for the universities within the Nevada System of Higher Education. Governor recommends general fund appropriations of $20.5 million over the 21 to 23 biennium in research space operation and maintenance, or O&M funding, for the University of Nevada, Reno and the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. The recommended funding for UNLV represents an annual increase of 9.9%, or approximately $412,000 compared to that which was approved by the 2019 legislature for fiscal year 21. These increases are due to two factors for UNLV, the first of which is the return of buildings previously leased by the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. This, coupled with an increase in operations and maintenance expenditures in base, had led to an increase in the governor recommended calculation for research O&M for UNLV from $11.04 per square foot in fiscal year 21 to $11.41 each year of the 21 to 23 biennium. The recommended funding for UNR represents an annual increase of 5.4%, or approximately $292,000 compared to that approved by the 2019 legislature for fiscal year 21. There is no change in total dedicated research space for UNR between the prior and coming biennium. However, similar to UNLV, total operations and maintenance expenditures did increase in base, resulting to an increase in the research square foot calculation from $10.43 in fiscal year 21 to approximately $11 in each year of the coming biennium. This is the primary and sole driver of the increase for UNR. This information is recapped at the table at the bottom of page 13. And a historical summary is provided at the top of page 14, looking at appropriated research, operations, and maintenance funding starting in the 13 to 15 biennium. Information provided by NSHE following the hearing, provided specifically by UNR and UNLV, noted that a breakdown of general funded operations and maintenance expenditures was not available, as they do not associate O&M expenditures with a revenue source. Fiscal staff would call this fund mapping, the association of specific functions with specific revenue sources. Additionally, the responses indicated research, operation, and maintenance is not funded with non-state supported budgets, and that all expenses associated with research O&M are included within the state-supported budgets. Responses also indicated that neither UNR nor UNLV recorded goals or measurable outcomes associated with these research, operations, and maintenance expenditures. In summary, it appears that UNLV and UNR have not been able to document how this funding is expended or identify added research benefits or measurable outcomes resulting from these general fund appropriations. If the subcommittee recommends approval of continued research O&M funding, it may wish to consider recommending a letter of intent requiring UNLV and UNR to uniformly track general fund research operations and maintenance expenditures by campus location and expense type, to report these expenditures and any associated outcomes annually to the Interim Finance Committee. The decision point at the bottom of page 14 asks if the subcommittee wishes to recommend general fund appropriations totaling $10.3 million in each fiscal year of the 21 to 23 biennium to fund research space operations and maintenance for UNLV and UNR, and to appropriate these funds prior to the calculation of the weighted student credit hour value as a pre-formula adjustment. Secondly, if the subcommittee wishes to recommend a letter of intent directing UNLV and UNR to utilize a uniform methodology to track and annually report to the Interim Finance Committee actual research operations and maintenance expenditures by campus location and expense type to identify benefits resulting from research O&M funding.
Committee members, are there any questions in the follow-up conversations that were had in talking with the system, realizing that we couldn't actually fund map, what we call fund map track these dollars? We thought it would be important for the future, for future legislatures to be able to understand how these dollars were being used, because as we build new buildings and the campuses expand and do more work, those dollars do come back as a request to us under research O&M to be able to, those are state dollars, so we would like to be able to understand how those dollars are being used, what the cost benefit might be, and what the multipliers might end up being. Not all research creates a multiplier, but I just think having data and making decisions based on the data is better than just a square footage. So with that, Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. Just a comment. So I was one of the individuals who participated when in the redo of funding for higher ed. And if you remember, we had this really complex formula with maintenance, and it really wasn't related to teaching. And there were several iterations of what we could do. And I think the reason we landed on this maintenance piece is because we broke out teaching, right? So the weighted student credit hours are basically the student portion of what the work that's done at the university. And it's been very positive in that those numbers have been rising over the years, and some have suggested maybe those numbers should be truncated at some point. But having more students who are retained and graduate with increasing graduation rates is really important. So that was one component when we redid the formula. And then the other one of the other components, of course, was making sure we took care of the buildings. So I'm not sure, it's probably going to be hard to measure what your return on investment is directly, because the formula was redone basically to make sure that students were covered, but also the plant was maintained, that the facilities were maintained. So I think it's partly the nature of the formula when we changed it back in around 2011, why we have this. So I just wanted to put that on the record, because we are benefiting from having two R1 Carnegie classified institutions, which I think is really important. And a lot of that has to do with the work that they're doing at the facilities. And I think we're all very proud of the facilities that we have. So thank you.
And I appreciate your comments, Senator Severs-Gansert, and I chaired Ways and Means in 13 and was on the Education Committee, and I remember tasking Majority Leader Horn and former Assemblyman Andy Eisen to help us get through establishing the new formula at the time, and I do remember the conversations about research O&M, and it has been a decade since then, and I think any data that we get from the system in dealing with this can help us move forward. It may not give us the answers that we want, but we won't know if we don't ask. So this may be the best way to do it, but in the future, I think we need to sit down and evaluate it and get those numbers so that the next legislature, when they're dealing with this issue, I'd like to leave behind a little more information for them to make those decisions moving forward. We're looking at approving an engineering building with a very large square footage attached to it. So I think that'll show very positive results, but we won't get the information if we don't ask for it. And I believe that's our responsibility, is to request it. And if there is an issue getting there, we will find out during the interim as they report to IFC to see what the barriers might be and how do we address those in the future. So this is simply a request for information so that we can make decisions based in the future on that.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. I am in agreement with you. I just thought we needed to have the perspective also of how we changed the formula dramatically and that we have these components that are broken out. So I think that information is good, and I, again, am sure the institutions are willing to work on that, but we're very proud of the institutions and the work that they've been doing. So thank you.
And I know they have got a lot of smart people there that can figure this out. Because they figured out this weighted student credit hour thing, and it's working really well for them. So, with that, Ms. Benitez-Thompson.
Thanks so much. And I think the data collecting we're gonna collect is gonna help. I think one of the things that I've always tried to reconcile in my head and the way that I think of it, and it might be because I came onto this committee after the formula was put in place, right? So I've just been asking questions and trying to see how things come along. And at least for O&M, I've always held it in my head that, and maybe I've been holding it in my head wrong, that so we have the money for students, and then in the CIP is where we do all our brick and mortar stuff, and that the O&M was supposed to be about the equipment. I remember that in one hearing, that when we said, okay, well, what is this paying for? And I thought I remember one of the university presidents talking about, well, it's the equipment, it's the, and part of it's the people too, I think leveraging grants, I heard at one time, but it might just even be helpful for us as a members on the committee to see if even what my assumptions are correct in what I've heard over, 6 years of, well, no, it's longer than that. About 6, I can't remember how long I've been on this committee, but in all that time since 2015 being on this committee, asking kind of piecemeal, what about this, what about that? I also think it's a good opportunity because now that we've got the R1 establishment of the two big universities, which is great, right? But this is typically where we see other big university systems really, with the conversations we have about monetizing the university's work or the investments in the R&I. There's always been this kind of weird, we have these conversations in 5 different places, but it always feels like they should dovetail here, right? Like when we talk about the Knowledge Fund and when we talk about who makes money from the Knowledge Fund. And I always assume well, if we're doing research, how come that isn't happening organically? Like if we've got great institutions that are doing really good research, that's the thing, private institutions and philanthropic basis throw money at. And so I've always wondered, maybe we get more of these conversations consolidated because we know some of that's happening. Obviously, we know you're out there doing fundraising and trying to leverage dollars for some of these research projects, and then the grants. My understanding was the grants usually pay for the person doing the research and the students who might be helping. But it feels like we could dovetail those kinds of conversations in a better place when we talk about research and what we're paying for research. And some of my assumptions, maybe I asked a question 5 years ago and something stuck in my head and something might have evolved and we're at a different place now. But I guess that will help, I think, pull a lot of different conversations together.
Any other questions or comments at this time? Seeing none, Ms. Howdeggy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to make a motion that the committee recommend general fund appropriations totaling $10.3 million in each fiscal year of the 21-23 biennium.
Ms. Howdeggy, is your mic on?
It is.
Okay, it's just low. Okay, that's fine.
Let's try turning it on again. There we go.
There you
Okay.
go.
I'll start from the beginning, Madam Chair. I would make a motion that the committee recommend general fund appropriations totaling $10.3 million in each fiscal year of the 21-23 biennium to fund research space operations and maintenance funding for UNLV and UNR and appropriate the funds prior to the calculation of the weighted student credit hour value as a pre-formula allocation. With that, Madam Chair, I would add that the subcommittee recommend a letter of intent directing UNLV and UNR to use a uniform methodology to track and annually report to the Interim Finance Committee actual research O&M expenditures by campus location and expense type, and to identify benefits resulting from research O&M funding.
Second.
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Howdeggy, a second from Senator Don Darrell-Loop. Any questions or comments on this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any in opposition? Hearing no opposition, passes unanimously of all members present. The performance pool, moving on. Yes, Mr. Kazera.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. John Kucereth, LCB Fiscal, beginning at Section E, Performance Funding Pool Set Aside at page 15 of your packet. The governor recommended a 20% set aside of general fund appropriations for the performance funding pool, totaling $107 million each year of the 21 to 23 biennium. These appropriations are transferred from each institution's instructional budgets to the performance funding pool budget, and based on each institution's performance, which are primarily based on the number of certificates and degrees granted, the performance funding pool is then transferred to the applicable institution's budget. The table at the middle of page 15 notes the amounts recommended for set aside as originally recommended by the governor. Fiscal staff will note that according to the system, all institutions qualify for 100% of the available performance funding pool to be appropriated in fiscal year 22, the first year of this biennium, based on outcomes achieved in fiscal year 2020. Similarly, in fiscal year 20 and 21, all institutions met or exceeded this performance funding. Fiscal staff will note that targets for years prior to fiscal year 23 are based on a fiscal year 2013 benchmark, and this is the basis that serves as annual growth against which each institution is measured based on its own performance. With this said, there was minimal risk of an institution not being able to earn back performance funding based on this prior methodology. Fiscal staff notes at the top of page 16 that according to the Chancellor's Office, the baseline against which performance will be measured for fiscal year 23 and 24 has been reset to fiscal year 2018 actuals. These institution-specific targets will equal 93% of the 18 performance, with no targets being reset to less than originally established in 20. According to the system, this method was used to address the large performance increases experienced by some institutions, while acknowledging that some institutions that performed closer to their fiscal year 2020 targets still would need some sort of floor for this performance funding reset. As recommended by the governor, performance funding set aside for each institution is approximately 20% of the total general fund appropriations prior to consideration of the recommended budget reductions. The governor's finance office submitted 8 budget amendments that adjust the amounts transferred from each formula institution to the performance funding pool to represent 20% of the total general fund appropriations after accounting for governor-recommended general fund budget reductions. In summary, and referencing the table at the middle of page 16, this transfer would represent approximately $13.4 million reduction and $13 million reductions in fiscal years 22 and 23, respectively, that would have gone to the performance funding pool and then be transferred to each individual institution. Fiscal staff notes that this is a revenue and expenditure neutral series of budget amendments, as noted by that final budget amendment performance pool line, noting that the funds remaining in the institutions are no longer being transferred to the performance pool. Also included in the series of budget amendments are adjustment to the M220 decision unit, which reflects the distribution of formula funds among the institutions as a result of including statewide inflation, statewide fringe benefit adjustments, and the correction to the UNLV operations and maintenance carve-out mentioned earlier. Again, these adjustments do not impact total general fund appropriations and are technical adjustments to correct the funding formula as a result of Governor Finance Office submitted budget amendments to reflect a 20% performance funding pool after accounting for the governor recommended budget reductions. The technical adjustments to the M220 decision unit are included at the table at the top of page 17 of your closing packet, and fiscal staff notes there are no concerns related to these adjustments. The decision unit.
And Mr. Kazera, because this is such a long motion, I'm going to stop you right there so that anyone can ask questions. I think we might have set a record for budget amendments all in one particular graph, so we might want to mark that one down. But I'd like to go ahead and have the discussion now so that after Mr. Kazera goes through the decision before the committee, we will not have to repeat it again for the record. So, questions? Ms. Howdege?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know that for the last 7 years, we've used the 2013 year to measure performance, and now we're using 2018. How long will 2018 be the year that we measure performance against, or are we going to revisit this every biennium and change that?
Assemblyman Heidi, thank you for the question. According to documentation submitted by the system office, it's fiscal staff's understanding that this baseline is representative of the performance targets for fiscal years 23 and 24, which is the final year of this biennium and the first year of the ensuing biennium. Per budget policy, the Board of Regents has been trusted with the authority to establish and revise these baselines as it sees fit. However, the information provided to fiscal staff notes that this baseline and the performance targets for fiscal years 23 and 24 have recently been set.
Ms. Benitez-Thompson?
Thank you so much, and I'm really happy with the direction this is going in because it's exactly what needed to happen. So just to make sure that we have I have a good understanding of this. So typically the 2018 years you've got the targets and the actuals, and those are based on points. And now this is it's going to be 93% of the 2018 performance. And so would it be the 2018? It would be there's outcome points and then weighted points. So is it I guess the weighted points that it would be 93% of? I see Mr. Klinger shaking his head, so yes. Okay. So we would just do the simple arithmetic of that points and 93% of that, and then that's that new base. Okay.
Question asked and answered with a head nod. That's kind of how it goes. So with that, are there other questions from the committee at this time on this? I think I'll be interested to see if the base year keeps evolving. I think holding it at that 1 year for so long really didn't incentivize the performance pool model as it needed to be. I've had concerns about this performance pool for a long time, but this seems to be trying to adjust in the right direction to actually make it be a real performance pool and not just holding money off to the side and then being able to come back and get it. And allowing the 2-year true up on it makes a difference. If someone doesn't make it, then they have the opportunity to get themselves trued up and move forward. So with that, not seeing any other questions or comments, Mr. Casera, if you'd like to indicate the decision point here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to. The decision for the subcommittee asks if the subcommittee wishes to approve submitted budget amendment A21-518-2987, A21-517-2980, A21-510-3011, A21-519-2994, A21-521-3018, A21-511-3012, A21-520-3005, and A21-512-3013, resulting in general fund performance set-aside of 20% after consideration of governor-recommended budget reductions totaling $93.7 million in fiscal year 22 and $94.1 million in fiscal year 23. Approval also includes adjustments to the M220 formula redistribution decision unit. If the subcommittee approves the performance funding levels as amended, does the subcommittee wish to include fiscal year 2020 performance funding in each institution's general fund appropriation, removing the need for the institutions to submit work programs for interim finance committee consideration to facilitate a known transfer of performance funding in fiscal year 22?
With that, I would take a motion from Assemblywoman Hodegee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I move we approve both recommendations as indicated by staff.
Second?
And a second by Senator Don Darrell Loop. Any questions or comments on the motion? Not seeing any. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any in opposition? Hearing no opposition, passes unanimously of the members present. Moving on, Mr. Casera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Beginning on page 18 of your closing package, the third major issue for the Nevada System of Higher Education is the budgeting of student-derived revenues. For the 21 to 23 biennium, the Board of Regents approved an increase in undergraduate and graduate registration fees at the universities, state college, and community colleges of approximately 2.8% in each of the next 2 fiscal years. The board also approved an increase in non-resident tuition of the same amount for the universities, state college, and community colleges for each of the next 2 years. This information is detailed at the table at the middle of page 18. The tables on page 19 note the total authorized expenditures requested by the governor for registration fees and non-resident tuition revenues for NSHE over the 21 to 23 biennium. Looking to follow-up information at the bottom of page 19 and continuing to page 20 of your closing packet. As has previously been requested in prior biennia, fiscal staff requested student-derived revenue projection updates from the system. 3 institutions responded, referring to the table at the top of page 20, that include updates for the University of Nevada, Reno, College of Southern Nevada, and Nevada State College. Table represents updated registration fee revenues, non-resident tuition revenues, and other miscellaneous student-derived revenues for those 3 noted institutions. The decision for the subcommittee at the top of page 20 reads, does the subcommittee wish to approve the student-derived non-general fund revenues for the 7 formula instructional institutions, 4 professional schools, the capacity enhancement budget, and the prison education budget, as recommended by the governor, and with noted adjustments for UNR, CSN, and NSC.
So with that, committee members, are there any questions? Yes, Ms. Howdigy.
I just want to ask, I'm not sure if anyone here from NG can answer it, but do you know if the COVID registration, that fee that was added to registration, the COVID fee, is going to continue to be charged for the next semester?
Mr. Klinger, go ahead and come to the table.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer. Madam Chair, through you to Assemblywoman Howdigy. I think what you're referring to is the $3 surcharge, and that expires in this semester and will not carry forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Other questions? Oh, Mr. Klinger, you put yourself in the hot seat, so you might as well hang out for a bit. Senator Kiefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As it relates to the updated projections from the 3 institutions that responded, did the other institutions not anticipate any change from what was included in GovRec, or did we just not get updates in time?
Mr. Klinger, and you can go directly to the member, please.
Senator Kiefer, they did not. They did look at it, and they felt they didn't need to adjust it from the governor's recommended budget.
And I know that was a lot of discussion because a couple of months ago, there was a lot more unknowns than there are today. So, thank you. Mr. Roberts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just going back to the student fee increases, and I probably should be able to do my math a little bit quicker, but maybe you know exactly, so what is the total dollar amount that all the institutions will receive as a result of the fee increases that were proposed?
Mr. Klinger?
Assemblyman Roberts, I don't have the total of, what you're talking about is just related to the 2.8%
Correct.
Increase. I'm not sure what that dollar amount is, but the way it works in policy is that it's tied to the higher education price index, and so those fees adjust based on that price index. But I don't know the total dollar just related to the percentage increase.
And just a quick follow-up.
Yes, Mr. Roberts.
So if the index, does it ever go down? So is there the likelihood that these fee increases could go down at some point based on your budget outlook?
I have not seen that, Assemblyman Roberts, I have not seen that price index go down recently, but like any price index, I suppose it could go down. And the way the board policy is written right now, that would adjust, but certainly that's something that the board could take a look at and change if they wanted to.
And thank you for the answers. And I'd love to get the dollar amount for that is, if there's an opportunity to add anything back or anything like that, depending on what it is, I'd like to see what that is. I'd hate to see the students carry the burden, of the cuts that we proposed. But thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Roberts. And Mr. Klinger, would it be possible for you to get that number for us? This is subcommittee closing, so I'd like it to be a discussion point when we get to full committee closing so that both committees on both ends of the building have the same information.
Madam Chair, happy to get that information.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Going Majority Leader.
Thank you
Once
so
you
much.
get in the chair, Mr. Klinger, you know what happens.
Well,
There we go.
it's just the same continuation of the kind of conversation the same questions from the beginning, the first hearing, right? So nothing new. And so just, I had asked, when we were looking at the higher education, the HEPI index, and it looks to be for 2021, actually like a 2.2%. So I'd asked in that hearing these are set at higher than that higher education index. And so I think at that time I was asking, why were we seeing that difference from what they were putting out, and we're doing 2.8, and then some of them 2.9. And so I think at that time you guys had mentioned that's more of a reference than an actual, I think board policy didn't necessarily tie you to that exact number, but it's just a number that the board references to help guide. But as we can see, it's a little bit more ballparky than exact, right?
For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer, to Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson. No, we use the actual amount, but for example, the most recent HEPI price index number that came out is actually, if I believe I'm doing this from memory, I believe is for fiscal year '24. So it's projecting out a couple of years, and the reason for that is we're trying to give the students basically price predictability so that when they register, they know, what the cost is going to be for the next 4 years.
Can I follow up? Okay, so I would say that you're saying it's like a smoothing effect then. So you're using the 2024 projected your numbers for in the 2022, 23 year. I guess the notes I'm reading, I'm like looking at the changes from 2021 to 2022, and that percent change was 2.8, 2.9. The future change looks to be about 2.7. And I want to say the NSHE policy on the reference to HEPI, that we had that first conversation last session, right? I think that it's been about 2 or 3 years since the board tied it. Sorry, Mr. Levitt's head keeps floating right in my line of sight there. Keeps tying, I think that's when we tied it. So is that why we did it? To just kind of make sure that for this biennium, I guess it's lining up in this biennium versus last biennium. Is that am I correct if I say that?
So for the record, Andrew Klinger to Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson. So for fiscal year '22, and I may have these dates wrong, we're actually using, I believe it's fiscal 18's HEPI number. So it's when the HEPI number comes out, essentially think of it as a table that has the registration fees out, and we're out to 2024 based on the 2020 HEPI. When we get the 21 HEPI number next year, we'll add academic year 25 to that table. So you're always adding another year based on the current HEPI. And the reason we do that, again, is so that if you're a freshman coming in, you can go and you can look at those registration fees for the next 4 years and get an idea of what your education is going to cost. So we don't, in other words, the most recent HEPI does not tie to this biennium.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, because when I needed, I think, a better understanding, because I'm seeing a number here, and I'm seeing a number here, and I just need to figure out how we're doing it, so I appreciate that.
And thank you, Ms. Benitez Thompson. It's a rolling system, and you just have to figure out where you are in the roll. Senator Severs-Gensert.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. Some other information, I think everyone's concerned about the rise in tuition. And so some other information that might be helpful is our nearby states, sort of the WUI states, the WICHE states, so the program that we are part of, as far as what their tuition rates are, because, in looking at sort of the numbers that we have, it's about $7,100 if you multiply out 30 units, so a year's worth of tuition, times the rates that we have. And when I looked at WUI the last time, I think it was like $9,300. So it's increasing in the state of Nevada, but we're well below, from my understanding, we're well below the average of neighboring states. So I think we need to keep that in mind too when we look at the escalators, because I think we started at a low amount and now we're using sort of this average. It's probably a regional average as far as the index that we're using, but we always were low, and so we're still low, substantially less than the average if you were to look at those numbers. So anyway, that might be helpful to have some more data around what's happening in neighboring states, and even more specifically, maybe the WICHE/WUI states. Thank you.
And I'm sure staff can put that all together for us if the system will provide. the number that Mr. Roberts was trying to get to, and we can deal with getting the other numbers so we can have a full conversation about it as we move forward. Okay. So with that, I believe we're at a decision point. With that, a motion, Ms. Haligi?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would move the subcommittee approve the student-derived non-general fund revenues for the 7 formula instructional institutions for professional schools, the capacity enhancement budget, and the prison education budget as recommended by the governor, and with the noted adjustments for UNR, CSN, and NSC.
Second?
A motion from Assemblywoman Hodge, second from Senator Don Loop. Other questions or comments on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any in opposition? Hearing no opposition, passes unanimously of the members present. Moving on, Mr. Casera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Kucera with LCB Fiscal. Moving on to the next decision point within this same item. The budgeting of student-derived revenues is based on budget policy decisions adopted by prior legislatures rather than being a component of the funding formula or within statute. The 2013 legislature initially adopted the recommendation of the 2011 to 2012 Interim Committee to study higher education funding that for purposes of determining the level of general fund appropriations to be budgeted within NSHE's state-supported operating budgets, budgeted non-general fund revenues should not offset the amount of general fund otherwise appropriated. In other words, this is a Section 10 or previously Section 7 exemption for NSHE. The 2015, 17, and 19 Muddy committees approved the continuation of this policy through the 21 biennium, and the governor's recommended budget for the 21 to 23 biennium continues this policy. And consistent with this adopted policy, in determining the institutional budget needs, general fund appropriations are not reduced in conjunction with increases in non-general fund revenues. For example, these additional student registration fee revenues added at the top of page 20 had no impact to general fund appropriations. And again, for purposes of implementing the legislatively approved budget, NSHE is exempt from Section 10 or previously Section 7. As discussed, the executive budget continues this policy adopted by previous money committees that for the purposes of determining the level of general fund appropriations, projected non-general fund revenues do not offset the amount of general funds. This language was previously included in Section 22 of SB 553 in the 2019 session, also known as the Authorizations Act, allowing NSHE to balance forward any unexpended non-general fund revenues to the next fiscal year for authorized purposes. This language was also approved by the 2017 legislature. The 2019 legislature approved language in the 2019 Authorizations Act to allow NSHE institutions to expend increases in non-resident tuition, registration fees, and other student-derived revenues without IFC approval, regardless of how the increased revenues to be expended. NSHE institutions are still required to receive approval by the Board of Regents and to report to the Interim Finance Committee. However, the approval of an IFC work program is not traditionally been required. The decision points at the middle of page 21 first asks if the subcommittee wishes to approve the governor's recommendation to continue the current budget policy initially adopted by the 2013 legislature that non-general fund revenues should not be used to offset the amount of general fund appropriations that would otherwise be budgeted. If the subcommittee approves this governor's recommendation to continue the policy, does the subcommittee wish to direct fiscal staff to include back language in the 2021 Authorizations Act to do one of two things? Authorize NSHE to balance forward any unexpended non-general fund revenues to the next fiscal year for authorized purposes in the NSHE state-supported budget, and or to authorize NSHE institutions to expend increases in non-resident tuition, registration fee, and miscellaneous student fee revenues without IFC approval, but with a requirement to report to the Interim Finance Committee, regardless of how the increase in revenue is to be expended. Fiscal staff note, either, both, or none of the ensuing two options may be recommended for approval.
So committee members' conversation on the decision points in front of us. I do remember this conversation in 13 as we were moving the formula. I think I actually got a call from, I'm trying to remember who it was. Oh, well, moving on. Wasn't a pleasant call. I believe this is consistent in how we've closed this since 13. And I believe all the components will work. And I think the information in the last point authorizing the institutions, people aren't going to believe I'm going to say this, but actually authorizing the institutions to expend the increases in non-resident tuition, registration fee, and all the other miscellaneous fees without IFC approval. The big word is without right there. But yet we will know what's going on. It'll be reported back to IFC so that we know exactly what's going on, and then future conversations can be had about it from there. So it gives the opportunity to address issues and report to IFC afterwards. Getting head nods, so getting good at reading the room lately.
If I could say this, Madam Chair, I think on the student fees, and I would imagine and she probably feels the same way, we're fine, right? Like, it's not like this overwhelming, like, yay, but it's like, fine. Okay, so.
This is what is before us at this moment in time. Senator Kickover.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as I'm sure you recall, this was really one of the core driving motivators behind the revamp of the formula to start with, right? Because there were certain institutions that were generating a lot of money on their own campuses and then having us offset general fund in a way that was really felt to be unfair. So this is a recognition of that primary change, and I think it's an appropriate policy to continue driving forward.
And I'm pretty sure it was Chancellor Rogers at the time, if I remember right. She started it. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that was the phone call. So some things you don't forget. Chancellor Rogers is one of those people. Loved working with him. So with that, committee members, any other questions or comments? I'm not seeing any, so Ms. Hodeggy?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would move to approve all recommendations as indicated by staff.
Thank you, Ms. Hodeggy, and and a second from Senator Don Darrow Loop. Any other questions or comments on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any in opposition? Hearing no opposition, passes unanimously of all members present. Moving on to capacity enhancements.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on to major issue number 4 within the Nevada System of Higher Education, our capacity enhancements, beginning at page 21 of your closing packet. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of $10.2 million in each year of the 21 to 23 biennium to continue to build capacity enhancements and support workforce growth and development of the states. As part of this recommendation, the 4 community colleges and state college collectively included $2.2 million in registration fee revenues in their capacity budget over the following biennium. The table at the top of page 22 summarizes the governor recommended capacity enhancement appropriations, again noting that $10.2 million each year of the 21 to 23 biennium. During the 2017 session, each institution provided and was approved for a 4-year plan that was since developed into a 5-year plan, culminating in the final years 4 and 5 in fiscal years 22 and 23 of this biennium. For the instructional institutions, additional funding for program areas would result in the generation of new weighted student credit hours. As such, this funding requested for these programs, as previously approved by the legislature, with the understanding that it would provide startup funds and that the programs would be supported through the funding formula once they're fully established. Information provided during the budget hearing is summarized in the table at the bottom of page 22, noting that approximately $6 million in weighted student credit hours were generated at the 4 community colleges and state colleges in fiscal year 20 as a result of previously approved capacity enhancement funds. Fiscal staff notes that this $6 million is included in the weighted student credit hour caseload adjustment total of $24 million mentioned in a previous section. Fiscal years 22 and 23, again, as noted, represent years 4 and 5 of the amended plan, and representatives from NSHE noted in the March 17th hearing, this is the end of the capacity enhancement program as originally devised. NSHE did indicate that a number of program areas would require ongoing funding beyond this 5-year plan, for programs that either do not generate weighted student credit hours or do not generate sufficient credit hours. The descriptions at the bottom of page 23 for the 4 community colleges, State College, and the Desert Research Institute note areas of enhancement as recommended by the governor and provided by the System of Higher Education. During the March 17th, 2021 hearing, members of the subcommittee requested information relating to the current 5-year capacity plan and inquired if the plan may be extended into the following 23-25 biennium. Moving to the table at the top of page 24, information follow-up received by the indicated institutions noted the amount of program support that is expected to be self-sustaining by fiscal year 24. It would be 1 year after the culmination of this 5-year plan. The first column of the table at the top of page 24 notes the current general fund capacity enhancement recommendation by the governor. The difference there represents the difference between what is expected to be self-sustaining and what is currently recommended for funding. According to the institution's responses, the funding differences may be addressed utilizing non-state revenue, formula funding, and/or caseload growth, or the elimination of programs or services. However, no institution indicated an intent to request general fund appropriations to fund future capacity enhancement need. The decision point at the bottom of page 24 has several components that I'll detail now. The first asks if the subcommittee wishes to recommend general fund appropriations totaling $20.3 million and registration fees totaling $2.2 million over the 21 to 23 biennium to support capacity funding enhancement requests for the State College, for community colleges, and Desert Research Institute. If the subcommittee wishes to approve this funding, the subcommittee may also wish to consider each of the following options, the first of which is to treat the enhancement funding as one-time funding for the 21 to 23 biennium. If this option is approved, the subcommittee should direct the system to remove one-time funding from the base budget. And secondly, to recommend reissuance of the 2019 letter of intent requiring that the institutions report to the Interim Finance Committee on a semi-annual basis, providing, at a minimum, a detailed expenditure report to reflect how the capacity funding is being spent, inclusive of the identification of specific position control numbers that are supported with the funding, a status update of the various programs supported through the funding, and the identification of generated weighted student credit hours by program area that are a direct result of the funding.
Questions from committee members? There was a lot of discussion about capacity over the years, and I believe it was last session where we placed our focus on the on CSN, GBC, TMCC, WNC, the other institutions. As far as capacity growth, it was meant to get us at a certain level, and I remember Senator Kiefer and I have many discussions over where this needed to be and when it needed to stop, and I almost looked at this as like almost a hold harmless in some ways. I know those two words linked together give people the heebie-jeebies in this building right now, but that was kind of the thought process behind it, was to get everybody on a level playing field and sustainable, and then move forward. So I'm comfortable with where we are with this right now, and I do think it's important to do the letter of intent again this time, because I think we need to keep evaluating this as we move forward to figure out when that point in time is going to be where this will no longer be needed as we move forward. So, are there any other questions from any committee members at this time? Not seeing any, I would accept a motion from Ms. Howdicky, and so indicated is perfectly fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would move to approve all recommendations as indicated by staff.
Second?
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Howdicky, a second from Senator Don Darrell Loop. Any questions or comments on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And any in opposition? Hearing none, passes unanimously of the members present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on to major issue number 5 is the Desert Research Institute funding, beginning at page 25 of your closing packet. The executive budget recommends the continuation of the existing methodology for calculating general fund appropriations for DRI that is comprised of 3 components. The first of which is a research grants and contracts formula component. The second is an operation and maintenance component based on the traditional base maintenance enhancement budget principles, and an inflationary adjustment intended to capture expenditures not otherwise budgeted. In total, the governor recommends general fund appropriations of $12.9 million over the 21-23 biennium. Beginning with the first component of DRI funding at Section A is the M207 Institute funding formula. This is the research grants and contracts component. Looking at the table at the middle of page 25, this funding formula is a tiered system dependent on the amount of total grants and contracts received by the Desert Research Institute. It is 12% of the first 25 million, 7.5% of the following 5 million, and then 6% of the 5 million after that, which each incremental $5 million block be receiving 5% in general fund appropriations. As recommended by the governor, Decision Unit M207 for the grants and contracts formula component for the Desert Research Institute represents a $196,000 reduction in each year of the biennium, noting the difference between what was recommended in the base year and what is recommended by the governor for the 21 to 23 biennium. This reflects a generic decrease in the amount of grants and contracts received by the institute, and would total $3.5 million in each year of the biennium. Does the subcommittee wish to approve general fund appropriations of $3.5 million in each year of the 21 to 23 biennium for institutional support and research administration functions based on the DRI funding formula, consistent with the existing funding policy and as recommended by the governor?
And thank you, committee members. Any questions or comments? I know that last session there were comments and concerns about how this formula was going to work. It seems as though it's not quite materializing the way folks thought it would. This isn't a mic drop moment or anything, so I'm not going to go there. But I hope that you'll look at something, and I know over this last interim it was not able to be achieved. A lot of change of leadership, a lot of moving pieces, and of course a pandemic thrown in on top as icing on the cake. So I'm hoping that you can look at something further in the future for DRI. I think it's very important that it has a better, stable funding mechanism. Very proud of this institution being in this state. So I realize it's a small cut, but in a small budget, a small cut is still just as drastic. So I'm looking forward to them being able to come back next session and have a real conversation about where DRI needs to be in the future. I think it needs to be an important conversation over the interim also. So with that, committee members, are there any other questions or comments on this particular budget? Seeing none, I'll go to Ms. Howdigy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would move that we close this budget as indicated by staff.
Second?
I have a motion from Ms. Howdigy, a second from Senator Don Loop. Any other questions or comments on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any in opposition? Hearing no opposition, passes unanimously of the members present. Okay, and moving on to the O&M portion of the discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're exactly right. Moving on to the second component of the Desert Research Institute funding formula, which is the operation and maintenance funding at the bottom of page 25. The DRI O&M funding addresses costs associated with space utilization and is recommended to be funded using the existing base maintenance and enhancement methodology. Based upon changes in O&M costs in base, the executive budget recommends decreases in general fund appropriations of $207,862 in fiscal year 22 and $178,078 in fiscal year 23. In total, $3.8 million, of which $3.7 million is general fund in fiscal year 22, and $3.9 million, of which $3.7 million is general fund, is recommended by the governor for DRI operations and maintenance support. The motion at the top of page 26 asks that the subcommittee wishes to approve $3.8 million or $3.7 million in general fund in fiscal year 22 and $3.9 million or $3.7 million in general fund in fiscal year 23 for DRI's operation and maintenance costs consistent with the existing funding policy and as recommended by the governor.
With that, committee members, any questions or comments at this time? Not seeing any. Assemblywoman Howdigy.
I move to approve as indicated by staff.
Second?
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Howdigy, a second from Senator Don Loop. Questions or comments on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any in opposition? Hearing no opposition, passes unanimously of the members present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on to the third and final component for the Desert Research Institute funding, option C on page 26. These are the inflationary adjustments in base. The governor recommends new general fund appropriations, base, and the inflationary adjustment unit M101, which is recommended by the governor to be a cumulative $277,848 in fiscal year 22 and $287,747 in fiscal year 23 to account for these inflationary adjustments not otherwise accounted for in the prior components of the funding formula. This recommended funding is based on increases to retirement insurance rates, salary reduction restoration, and employee step increases. Fiscal staff will note that these amounts are cumulative, and amounts appropriated by the prior legislature for amounts in base have been removed. So these $278,000 and $288,000 represents the sum total of the inflationary adjustments recommended by the governor for the Desert Research Institute. As noted, the system has previously indicated an intent to request a change for this funding formula. However, the Chancellor's Office has communicated to fiscal staff that a proposed revision may be requested as part of the 23 to 25 biennium budget. The decision for the subcommittee at the middle of page 26 asks if the subcommittee wishes to recommend general fund appropriations of $277,848 in fiscal year 22 and $287,747 in fiscal year 23 to account for inflationary adjustments not otherwise accounted for in the DRA formula, consistent with the policy adopted by the 2000 legislature and continued by the 2019 legislature, and as recommended by the governor.
Thank you very much. So committee members, any questions or comments? Not seeing any. Assemblywoman Howdiggy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to approve as indicated by staff.
Second?
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Howdiggy, a second from Senator Don Darrow-Loop. Any other questions or comments on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any in opposition? Hearing no opposition, passes unanimously of the members present. Moving on to the Nevada Teach program.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. John Kucera, LCB Fiscal for the record. Major closing issue number 6 within the Nevada System of Higher Education is the Nevada Teach program. Details provided during the subcommittee hearing noted that $150,000 in general fund appropriations is recommended by the governor each year of the 21 to 23 biennium to continue the Nevada Teach program at UNR. This program was initially approved by the 2017 legislature through AB 522 and allows a student to earn dual degrees in secondary education in one of many STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math majors. Information provided by the budget following the March 17th, 2021 hearing noted that the program has graduated 55 students since 2015, with 20 additional students expected to graduate, and that the system noted a 72% of students continued from the introductory Nevada Teach 101 program to the subsequent Nevada Teach 102 program, which is a rate higher than the national average for similar programs. Fiscal staff notes also that this is a similar level of funding as approved by the 2019 legislature, which included a $300,000 appropriation in the first year of the prior biennium. This appropriation would be $150,000 in each year of the 21 to 23 biennium. The motion at the top of page 27 asks if the subcommittee wishes to recommend general fund appropriations of $150,000 in each year of the 21 to 23 biennium to continue the Nevada Teach program at the University of Nevada, Reno.
Any questions or comments? Senator Seavers-Gansert.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. I just want to comment on this program. It's a great program because not only does it increase the bandwidth of individuals who are going into teaching, we also get subject matter experts. So I think this is a really strong program that we've been funding, and I appreciate that this is potentially in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I remember correctly, I believe Speaker Frierson was involved in this particular conversation a number of years ago. So thank him for his work on this also. Have to grow our own teachers. That's the best way to do it. So with that, committee members, are there any other questions on the Nevada Teach program? Not seeing any. Assemblywoman Howdiggy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would move to close the Nevada Teach program as indicated by staff.
Senator Darrow-Loop.
Second?
Thank you. I have a motion from Assemblywoman Howdiggy, second from Senator Don Darrow-Loop. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any that was pretty weak. Okay. This is the Nevada Teach Program. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And any opposed? Not hearing any opposition, passes unanimously of the members present. Moving on to the engineering building, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The seventh and penultimate major issue within the Nevada System of Higher Education is the UNR 2017 Engineering Building Debt Service Budget. The Governor recommends the elimination of all general fund appropriations from the 2017 Engineering Debt Service Budget. Through the passage of the 2017 CIP, or Capital Improvement Program, $41.5 million in general obligation bonds were approved, with the legislature's intent that debt service be paid from the general fund. However, the governor's recommended budget includes $2.9 million in each year of the 21 to 23 biennium to be paid out of the treasurer's bond interest and redemption account, and those $2.9 million in general fund appropriations removed from the 2017 UNR Engineering Debt Building Service. The debt service payments have been accounted for in the affordability analysis as presented in the treasurer's general obligation debt capacity and affordability report for the 21 to 23 biennium. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend the removal of general fund appropriations in the 2017 UNR Engineering Building Debt Service Budget, resulting in the removal of the 2017 UNR Engineering Building Debt Service Budget from the 2021 Appropriations Act?
Committee members, any questions? There's a conversation in the CIP component of this committee also, so we've heard it twice. So with that, Ms. Howdigy?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I move we recommend closing as indicated by staff.
Second?
I have a motion from Ms. Howdigy, second by Senator Don Darrell Loop. Questions or comments? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any in opposition? Hearing no opposition, passes unanimously of the members present. Moving on to the reconciliation part of this budget.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Kucerath, LCB Fiscal for the record. The final major closing issue within the Nevada System of Higher Education statewide closing is major issue number 8, the budget position reconciliation. Fiscal staff will note that these decision units in ensuing conversation are largely administrative in nature and represents a systematic difference between how the Board of Regents approves a budget and how the legislature approves a budget for the Nevada System of Higher Education. At the end of this, there'll be 2 decision units for consideration by the subcommittee, one recommending a change in personnel funding policy, and the second including a letter of intent. With that said, the first 3 components on page 27 note there are 265 approximately positions that are included in the base budget as submitted by the Governor's Finance Office through NSHE that includes 3 components. The first are positions funded with offsetting reductions in operating revenues and operating expenditures. The Governor is recommending 104.84 FTE positions funded by revenue-neutral expenditure shifts between NSHE operating categories and the personnel categories. Again, these are not new positions. Most, if not all, of these positions already exist in the institution's budget and are currently funded as they are being recommended to now. These decision units are largely administrative in nature and are included as results of conversations between LCB fiscal staff, the system office, and the Governor's Finance Office, attempting to reconcile the positions approved by the 2019 legislature and those positions being requested by the system office through these budget decision units. The second recommends positions funded with registration fees. This is $17.4 million in 22 and $17.7 in 23 to support approximately 151 positions, again, that are largely already existing and largely already funded with the current funding sources. The third are additional authorized federal funds of $1.3 million over the biennium to support 7.9 FTEs within the agricultural experiment station budget. Moving to the top of page 28, there are some position reconciliation there are some implications to these position reconciliations. The first, in years where there's a cost of living adjustment or a COLA, the amount appropriated to support this COLA would likely increase as positions are identified within the legislatively approved budget. The opposite is also true for any position-related salary reductions. And again, fiscal staff is just noting that these decision units are largely administrative in nature. Based on the current budget policy, NSHE, through the Board of Regents, has the authority to establish these positions and receive the related funding and revenue sources. So these positions would still likely exist and would still likely be funded largely as presented, even were these decision units not approved. However, the approval of these decision units does allow for a reconciliation between the positions as approved by the Board of Regents over the prior interim and the current legislatively approved budget. Based on information provided by the system following the March 17th, 2021 hearing, fiscal staff requested additional details getting just to this point, the association between positions and different funding sources, as well as the process the system utilizes to reconcile positions as approved by the legislature and as approved by the Board of Regents. Follow-up information provided by the system noted that positions are not fund mapped. And again, this means that positions are not specifically associated with one or more individual revenue sources. Instead, according to information provided by the system office, the general proportion of, for example, general fund revenues and student-driven revenues used to support a budget would be deduced to describe the funding composition for positions within that budget. For example, I believe the example used in documentation was if a budget is funded 70% with general fund and perhaps 30% with student-derived revenues, the positions within that budget would be assumed to have a similar funding structure, 30% student-derived revenues, 70% general fund appropriations. Additionally, representatives from NSHE testified that budgets are approved by the Board of Regents within the limits approved by the legislature, but may include detail not specifically approved by the legislature. The best example for this is the caseload adjustments that were just approved by this subcommittee that included $24 million of caseload growth. It is likely a significant portion of this incremental caseload growth will be used to support new positions. However, those new positions are not specifically identified or enumerated within the legislatively approved budget. So fiscal staff would expect some new positions to be added over the interim that would show up in the legislatively approved base budget for the following biennium. There is a budget policy that is being recommended for consideration by fiscal staff, and this is being brought up for two reasons. One, the conversation regarding the funding of positions is happening with these 264 positions being requested to be added to the legislatively approved budget. And secondly, there is currently no COLA recommended by the governor, so the opportunity to have a policy discussion right now without any funding implications may be beneficial. Still on the middle of page 28. In summary, unlike other executive branch agencies where the legislatively approved funding for positions and programmatic expenses is tied to an individual funding source, the responses indicate that NSHE generally funds positions proportionate to the percentage share of revenues within each budget. This is also true for positions that may not be 100% generally funded, and others may be some combination of general fund student revenues or federal revenues. To be consistent with the funding of other executive branch agencies, when future cost of living arrangements or salary reductions, for example, furloughs, are considered by the legislature, the subcommittee may wish to consider recommending the adoption of a new budget policy to calculate any future COLA funding or salary reductions for the NC budgets, beginning with the 21 to 23 biennium, based on the proportion of general fund appropriations within each budget. This would be generally consistent with how the 2019 legislature funded the 3% COLA, but fiscal staff will note that this budget policy proposed for consideration is a departure from the historical practice of funding COLA and professional merit in those years where it was funded solely with general fund appropriations, even in cases where positions are funded with other revenue sources. If the subcommittee wishes to recommend future COLA funding or salary reductions be based on the proportion of general fund appropriations within each NSHE budget, back language could be added to the 21 pay bill. Moving to page 29 of your closing packet, the final recommendation within this major issue, given the different budgeting practices of the system, the subcommittee may wish to issue a letter of intent instructing the system to provide a report to the interim finance committee over the 21 to 22 interim, specifically identifying new positions created and eliminated as a result of actions taken by the 21 legislature. This letter of intent would also instruct NSHE to clearly denote positions approved and eliminated by the Board of Regents compared to the positions approved in the budget by the 21 legislature when preparing the 23 to 25 biennium budget. The decision point in the middle of page 29, asks if the subcommittee wishes to recommend the inclusion of 264.96 FTE positions, full-time equivalent, within the various NSHE budgets funded with expenditure shifts, federal funds, and student-derived revenues. The second decision point asks if the subcommittee wishes to recommend the addition of back language in the 21 pay bill requiring future COLA funding and/or salary reductions be based on the proportion of general fund appropriations within each NSHE budget. And third, does the subcommittee wish to issue a letter of intent instructing NSHE to provide a report to the interim finance committee over the 21 to 22 interim, specifically identifying new positions created and positions eliminated as a result of actions taken by the 21 legislature, and instructing NSHE to clearly denote positions approved and eliminated by the Board of Regents as compared to the positions approved in the budget by the 21 legislature when preparing the 23 to 25 budget.
So there's a lot of information here, and I think it would be good for us to have the conversation in the 19 back language. Mr. Casera, if you would just make sure that we're all on the same page, the discussion about merit pay, if you would clarify what we did in 19 on that, so folks remember, and then how that fits into this, just so that everybody's all on the same page, because I know that question's going to come up.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. The 2017 pay bill included a prohibition on the utilization of general fund appropriations to fund merit and associated personnel expenditure increases for NSHE. This language was removed in the 2019 pay bill and is not intended to be included in the 2021 pay bill. So as far as current budget policy is concerned, there is no, and there is not planned to be, any legislative restriction on the utilization of general fund appropriations for merit. This is in line with the recommendations coming from the Board of Regents to establish a 1% merit pool, I believe not in this current fiscal year, but beginning in future fiscal years. This issue is tangential to that of funding COLAs. Were the back language approved for the 2021 pay bill, were a COLA or similar budget reduction related to personnel approved in this or future biennia, that increase or decrease in general fund would be based on the proportionate share of general fund within each NSHE budget. Please let me know if that answers your question, Chair Carlton.
I think it makes it clear to everyone, because we know we have a lot of folks listening, and I know that's the thing that's going to make my phone buzz and my email go wonky. So I just wanted to make sure Mr. Casera got that out there, because it's been a topic of discussion for as long as I can remember sitting in this chair. So, Senator Kieckhofer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to follow up a little bit on Mr. Casera. The language obviously had the prohibition back in 17. It was removed. I think it was the intent of the legislature that by removing that language, it was giving our sort of authorization for general funds to be used for merit. It's been represented, at least to me, that the Board of Regents may be looking for a more explicit authorization to use some of these funds for merit. Perhaps a statement from the system as to whether they believe that type of authorization is needed would be helpful, or whether just not having that language in the Appropriations Act would suffice for a statement of intent.
I'm not going to put Mr. Casera in those crosshairs. So, do we want the Chancellor, or is Mr. Klinger, if you want to come back to the hot seat? And Chancellor, thank you for being here this whole morning with us. If you would like to share your thoughts on that, they would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Melody Rose, Chancellor of the Nevada System of Higher Education. I appreciate you turning to me, Madam Chair, but I see Andrew Klinger is there in the room, and I'll defer to him. He's been part of this conversation at NSHE far longer than I have.
It's always appropriate to phone a friend, Chancellor. We appreciate that. So, Mr. Klinger.
Madam Chair, for the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer, through you to Senator Kieckhofer. Senator Kieckhofer is correct. We did ask for explicit language that would allow this, but in discussions with staff, and appreciate the chair bringing and putting it on the record today. I think with a record that's been created here, I think we're good with, as long as the restriction isn't in there, I think we're good with that going forward.
So, Mr. Klinger, if you need a note from me to take home with you, I'm happy to write one. Okay? So I think that answers that question. So, Ms. Benitez Thompson.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. In keeping with my consistent themes of things I talked about at the first hearing or at the pre-hearing. So I had talked about the fact that supportive of the merit pool, the 1%, but then had also, I think in not the best articulate way, the suggestion about where that merit pool is applicable. And I think it makes the most sense, and I think it's worth consideration of you folks and the committee members to say, could it have it apply to only the below the dean, so that we're getting at more of the classified positions, we're getting at more of those folks that when we get emails from people who work in NSHE and we hear about, I've been stuck at $37,000 a year, and so we get a little bit more targeted in where these funds, these merit pool dollars would be applied.
Mr. Klinger.
Madam Chair, for the record, Andrew Klinger, through you to Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson. So we had a task force that made recommendations, and that task force recommended the 1% merit pool. As part of that recommendation from the task force, what they recommended is that the merit pool policy be established by the presidents in consultation with the chancellor. So we actually have not yet developed what that policy looks like and how it would apply.
I appreciate that. So I guess I imagine our decision, our timeframe to make that decision might not quite line up with your timeframe, but I do feel like it would be an important conversation for this committee to consider. So if there would be an ability to have some of those conversations to come together sooner than later, it would be meaningful, I believe.
And Madam Chair, through you to the
You
Assemblywoman.
can go directly to the member, Mr. Klinger. That's
For the
fine.
record, Andrew Klinger. So we had planned on taking, so the Board of Regents has not yet adopted this policy that was recommended by the task force. And so we had recommended taking that policy to the June Board of Regents meeting. And I think as staff indicated, we would likely delay the implementation of it, just given the budget reductions that each institution is experiencing, in addition to allow them time to develop that. So the policy actually hasn't been adopted, but likely will be adopted at the June 10th board meeting.
Thank you so much. And then I think what I'll just do is look at some additional conversations with our staff and take some conversations offline. Because I think the one thing we don't want to do is end up with the 1% merit increase landing in places where you could have a reasonable argument that you've got salaries that aren't, there are some positions that are struggling. When the NSHE, that last salary study was done, and it identified positions where they were seeing that compression in more than others. And so I imagine that's a policy that's going to be considered, but I would want it also reflected in our language, or have our language help reflect and drive your policy, so that once again, we get the dollars kind of matching where we're envisioning in this conversation right now.
So, Mr. Klinger, I think what you're hearing from the majority leader is that she may be considering giving you some guidance before you get to that June meeting on where we think the legislature might like to have you look at how this will break out as far as the merit pool goes. We know, and I'm not sure if it's still true, but it wasn't that long ago where we had system employees that were on Medicaid. So we want to do everything we can to support those folks at those particular levels, so that it just, because we feel like those are the people that are that are in most need right now. So understanding that we really don't have a seat at the table other than as we close these budgets, and this is subcommittee closing, we'll be going to full committee closing. So I'm going to hazard a wild guess to say that the majority leader is probably going to bring this up again at full committee, and I hope you and she can have further conversations between now and then about our wishes on how we would like to at least have, you know, a seat at the table in those future conversations as we move through this system. So thank you, Mr. Klinger. Any comment?
Madam Chair, for the record, Andrew Klinger, happy to have those conversations.
Okay, good. With that, I don't think there are any other questions or comments. So going back to the back language discussion, I believe we've made that fairly clear. And then the letter of intent as far as identifying physicians and funding and moving forward there. It's all about being able to have the data, have the accountability, and know where the state dollars are going. So are there any other questions or comments on the decisions that are in front of the subcommittee at this time? Not seeing anyone wishing to be recognized, I will go to Ms. Howdiggy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I move to approve recommendations as indicated by staff, including the back language and letter of intent.
Second. I have a motion from Assemblywoman Howdiggy, a second from Senator Don Loop. Any questions or comments on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those in opposition? Hearing none in opposition, passes unanimously of the members present. Moving on to other closing items.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Kucera, LCB Fiscal for the record. That's the end of the heavy lift. Moving on to the first other closing items. Number 1 is funding for the non-formula and professional school budgets, beginning on page 29 and continuing on to page 30 of your closing packet. The table at the top of page 30 notes the general fund reductions and total appropriations recommended by the governor for the non-formula accounts. As reflected in this table and mentioned in major issue number 7, the governor recommends the elimination of general fund appropriations for the 2017 UNR Engineering Building Debt Service, which is why it's shown as zeros in the fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23 columns. Other enhancements contained within the non-formula budgets previously discussed include governor-recommended budget position budget reductions in major issue number 1, the Nevada Teach program in major issue number 6, and budget position reconciliation in major issue number 8. There are no significant changes here as recommended by the governor. As shown on page 2 of this closing document, the following table at the top of page 31 reflects the governor's recommended budgets for the professional schools. Other enhancements contained within the professional schools previously discussed include governor-recommended budget reductions and budget position reconciliations. The motion toward the top of page 31 asks if the subcommittee wishes to approve the governor-recommended 21 to 23 biennium funding levels for the NSHE non-formula and professional school state-supported operating budgets.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, I would accept a motion from Assemblywoman Howdiggy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I move to approve as indicated by staff.
Second. I have a motion from Assemblywoman Howdiggy, second by Senator Don Loop. Questions or comments on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any in opposition? Hearing no opposition, passes unanimously of the members present. Moving on to the Appropriations Act language.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. The second other closing issue within the NSHE statewide closing document is the Appropriations Act language. 2019 legislature approved the addition of back language in the Appropriations Act, which was AB 543, for the 21 to 23 biennium. The language authorizes the transfer of general fund appropriations between NSHE's state-supported operating budgets, subject to the recommendation of the governor and approval of the Interim Finance Committee. Apologies for the previous point, that should be 19 to 21. The 2019 legislature approved the language in order to provide NSHE with flexibility to respond to budget adjustments if necessary. Similar language was also approved in the 2011, 13, 15, and 17 legislatures. In addition to the transfer authority necessary to administer the performance funding system, does the subcommittee wish to continue NSHE's existing authority to transfer general fund appropriations between NSHE budget accounts, subject to the recommendation of the governor and the approval of the Interim Finance Committee?
And Mr. Kassir, if you'd go ahead and do technical adjustments also, and we'll take one motion for both, please. Thank you.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Other closing issue number 3 are technical adjustments for NC state-supported budgets. Fiscal staff requests authority to make necessary technical adjustments. And this motion at the bottom, page 31, reads the same. Does the subcommittee wish to provide authority for staff to make any necessary technical adjustments for all NC state-supported operating budgets?
Thank you very much. Ms. Howdiggy?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I move to approve both recommendations as indicated by staff.
Second?
And I have a second from Senator Dondero Loop. Senator Kickover, did I overlook you? Did you have a comment? I'm sorry, I was just rolling through the last two, so I apologize if I got ahead of anyone. So, Senator, go ahead, please, if there's a comment or question.
Considering I think this is our last motion on the agenda, I will take the opportunity, I guess. I think that the formula we've just approved has worked really well for the better part of a decade. It's got some quirks, as we've well known, and it may be time to take another sort of look at.
You got to wait till I'm out of the building before you finish that sentence.
I see Ms. Howdiggy down there, perfectly willing to serve on an interim committee looking at the funding formula, right? So I just think it might be
Howdiggy, we
time
need
to
to
do
have a
another review of how we do this and maybe clean it up a little bit. But obviously, that's not an opinion shared by everybody in this committee, but.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Senator Severs-Ganser. Okay,
you.
the train's jumping.
Thank you, Chair. Just before, I missed saying something in like 2 motions ago or a motion ago. Just to make a comment, I know we're going to look at restorations, but when you look at the State Health Lab and the cuts to the State Health Lab, with everything that's happened with COVID, I want to make sure that we prioritize that and also some of our professional schools. And I missed that comment period, so thank you.
And thank you, Senator Severs-Ganser. I believe everyone on this committee could probably point to something at this moment in time and wish to put that on the record. So I'm just going to assume that everything we've cut in the last 100 days or 80 days, everybody wants back. So I'm just going to kind of put that out there. So with that, we have a motion and a second, and of course, it includes all the technical adjustments that the staff is going to need to make. So if there's no other questions or comments on the motion, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any in opposition? Hearing no opposition, passes unanimously of the members present. I'd like to thank the system for all their hard work and Mr. Klinger, and we'll be doing full committee closing, and there'll be future conversations about. I've had the honor to chair the subcommittee and work and/or wrestle with the system over the last 3 or 4 biennium, and I appreciate all the hard work that they do. We don't necessarily agree, but we each have a job to do in representing our folks, and I believe this time it has gone much better than it has in the past because people were willing to sit at the table and have honest conversations about where the system needs to go and what the role of the legislature is with the system. So I appreciate all the hard work, and congratulations, Chancellor. You're very, very lucky that this closed on the day that it did. Otherwise, this could have been a 2-day meeting. So with that, I don't think there are any other comments at this time. The last thing on our agenda would be public comment. I will open it up to public comment here in the room.
Good morning, committee members. Thank you very much. Kent Irvin, K-E-N-T-E-R-V-I-N, Nevada Faculty Alliance, the independent association of faculty at NC colleges and universities. We work to empower faculty to be fully engaged in our mission to help students succeed. We're happy that there are no cuts beyond GovRec today, but we hope that there can be some add-backs, as discussed, based on the Economic Forum and the American Rescue Plan, especially for the professional schools and non-formula programs. The vacant positions and terminations on page 5 of the closing document cannot be refilled based on one-shot federal funds. Those lost positions have real effects on students, fewer course sections available, and larger class sizes. For other state agencies, you have authorized the use of federal funds to add back positions starting in October. The NSHE budgets will need similar authorizations from the state portion of ARP funds to start faculty and staff searches and to keep positions in the base budgets and not make those cuts permanent. A couple of other points. Thank you very much for addressing the back language on professional merit, which will allow implementation of the NSHE Performance Pay Task Force recommendation to internally fund a merit pool within existing salary budgets. This is the only way we have now to start addressing salary compression issues in a small way over time. Regarding administrators, the letter of intent from Senator Raggio around 1989 stated that the state would only fund merit for deans and below, and that was in effect for the decades it was funded by the state as part of the base budget. And I'll note that while there's a percentage pool, it has been distributed at most institutions as a fixed increments amount, not as a percentage of salary, so it doesn't favor high salary individuals as much as you might think from the percentage. Regarding the COLA funding, we are glad to have the open and transparent policy discussion so there are no surprises later on. We also appreciate that we're even talking about COLAs for state employees post-economic forum, and we hope that a COLA can be provided for the next biennium, or sometime in the next biennium, based on inflation and to offset the 0.25% increase in retirement contributions. But we all need to realize that this proportionate funding policy means that going forward, the student portion of instructional budgets, which is 25 to 50% depending on institutions, will now have to pick up the difference in any COLAs. Thank you very much.
Any other public comment here in the room? Not seeing anyone wishing to be recognized. Broadcast services, do we have anyone on the phone line for public comment this morning?
If you would like to make public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 853. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Doug Unger, D-O-U-G-U-N-G-E-R, UNLV Chapter President and Southern Nevada Government Affairs Representative for the Nevada Faculty Alliance. Thank you, Chair Carlton, Chair Dondero-Loop, Vice Chair Haragui, and subcommittee members for your hard work and deliberations to set a higher education budget during this season of such uncertainty. We thank you for assessing that Tuesday's economic forum takes pressure off any need to cut higher education further than does the governor's budget. We hope you might see enough soon to restore some of the 12.5% reductions, especially for research funding, so we can better prepare Nevada for a prosperous future and prepare our students to embrace and set off on their prosperous careers. Thank you so much for agreeing to remove the back language prohibiting performance pay from appropriations, as you did during the 80th session, so our institutions can use a 1% pool at no increased cost to the state to retain quality faculty. Better times are coming, and I personally believe that we're going to have a bit of difficulty keeping up with the boom and growth that we foresee coming to our state. As much of the reductions as you can see fit to restore and prudent to assign will be very much appreciated and will help us to resume normalcy after this god-awful pandemic and to better prepare our institutions for the future. We feel we are permanent infrastructure of this state, and anything you assign to us in the next weeks as everyone is coming at you for money will be very much appreciated. Thank you so much for your work, and thank you, Chair Carlton. I've listened to you for years and years and years, and I very much appreciate your guidance of this committee and all the work you've done for higher education in our state. Thank you.
Thank you. Broadcast services, is there another caller?
Chair, the public comment line is open and working. However, we have no more callers at this time.
Right, thank you. So that does it for public comment. Thank you, committee, for your hard work this morning. Thank you for the system for being here to answer the questions and keep us on track. So with that, we are adjourned. Ways and Means members, I will see you at 6 o'clock this evening for Ways and Means at dusk. So, here we go.